Hi, Prashanthi, how are you doing?
Hello, Ranjit. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. So yeah, a lot of things happened in the last week. Let's start with the latest updates. I believe there are a few updates before the Trump admin left. So we just want to know what are those updates and what are the chances of those becoming, implemented in the current administration. Will they still pursue it, or are they going to go, down? So please explain what's going to happen, and what are these regulations.
Well, there are many regulations, so I'm not quite sure which ones you're asking about. There are like
Yeah, there are
100
three of it.
regulations that I passed.
Yeah, especially
But
the last.
but I think the ones that concern legal immigration and H1Bs is maybe what I can focus on. And there are three of those. So the first one is, this basically is something of interest to people who are on H1 or people who have IT companies. So the first one is basically the registration process. So we know that the H1B cap season will start on March 1, right? So, and we know that there's a new process since last year. It's first a registration. So anyone who's interested will first register, and then they will, they're supposed to have a random lottery. Earlier, everybody would just file and they would pick based on a random lottery. This year, same as last year, they're going to first do a pre-registration. So basically, you'll just put in your name and some information, and based on that registration, they will pick. So you don't have to file the entire petition, which is helpful because it's a waste of all the money and resources, time that go into filing a petition if it's not finally picked in the cap. So what they're saying, the new regulation that is published in the Federal Register and will be effective on March 7th, says that the lottery system will no longer be a random lottery that is computerized, but it will be based on wage levels. So, for example, if you're using a wage level of 4, then it's likely that your case will be picked. If you're using wage level 1, then it's most unlikely that your case will be picked. So they're going to do the lottery based on the wage levels. So they will start with wage level 4, then they will go to wage level 3, then 2, then 1. One interesting point about this is that, for example, in Kentucky, maybe wage level 4 is equivalent to wage level 1 in California or in some other big state. So there's no parity even there. So they will just blindly go based on the wage levels. They're not actually looking at the numbers in the salary. They're just going based on wage levels. So the disparity is not just geography here, because obviously then only people from Kentucky will get their H1s picked in the lottery, and not people from New York or San Francisco or some other big city. So the disparity with reference to geography, and not just that, disparity with just the whole system that they're choosing, just to presume that someone who has a wage level 4 is somehow more important than someone who has a wage level 2. To give you an example, say a software engineer has a wage level 4, but a physicist or a scientist or even a Nobel Prize laureate has wage level 2, the software engineer is going to be picked, even though he is not exemplary in his field, or he is just a regular average Joe. He's going to be picked, or she is going to be picked over your physicist or scientist or doctor, or so basing wage level and saying that based on wage level we think you're more important, or that's why we'll pick you, is itself complete nonsense. So as to what will happen with this published rule, it is to be implemented. It's a final rule. There is notice period is over already, but the Biden administration said that automatically they were, for all regulations that have not yet been come into force, that are not yet been implemented, they are giving us 60 days. They are postponing it by 60 days. And then they will look into it further and decide what to do with it. So If you postpone that by 60 days, then it'll go into May. They can postpone it further as well, or they can rescind it depending on the comments that they get. So we have to wait and see whether this is actually set to be implemented, which it is set to be implemented, but whether it'll actually be implemented or not. The other thing to keep in mind is even if it's implemented, I'm sure the next day there will be a court case. There will be several challenges in court. And I don't think it stands a chance because they're just basically changing the law. And a regulation is not a law. A regulation is supposed to interpret the law, not change the law. So there is no law which says that, you can have the lottery system based on wage levels. So they have to go back to Congress if they actually want to change that. And they haven't done that. So, based on that, I think hopefully courts will throw it out. So that is one very, very important change that is forthcoming. The second change is with reference to wage levels. Now, and that has also been published. And there is a date that's going to be implemented. That's in March. So the wage levels also is a little scary because they've brought back, everything is back to status quo. If you remember in October, they did an interim final regulation and the wage levels actually changed and level 1 became, equivalent to level 3. So it's the same thing again, back to square one. They were able to, the courts threw out that interim final regulation based on procedural. So they said that they didn't follow the actual comments and publication period. And based on that, the courts invalidated that law, that regulation. But now they have published it again and they're now doing it procedurally correct. So this time, if there is, and I'm sure there will be, challenge in court, they'll have to actually look into the merits of whether such changes in wage level is, based on the Immigration and Nationality Act or it violates the act. So they'll actually be looking into the merits and not just the procedure. So we have to see whether that gets implemented. Also, since the same thing, the regulation is stayed by 60 days. So, it's up to the administration to decide whether they will move forward with it or not. So same as, DOL wages or the registration, both are in the same book. We have to wait and see what the new administration will do. And the third and the most, I think, damaging regulation is, for at least for IT staffing companies, is strengthening of H1B regulation that has not yet been published, but it can be published anytime. It can be published by the new administration as well. But it's proposed regulation, whereby they say that if you're a staffing company and if your employee is working for a third party, for an end client, and if you're not controlling, it's again back to the right to control. And if you don't control the work of the employee, and those 9 points that that we've had to deal with for years with reference to right to control. So that has come back, and they're saying that if you don't meet those requirements of an employer, then not only do you have to file the LCA and the H1, but the end client also has to file the entire H1B petition. In addition to that regulation, preempting the regulation, the Department of Labor and the Wage Hour Division, WHS, both have published memos stating, and this is not a regulation, this is a memo that they have published. Remember, every agency is different and can operate independent of one another. So the DOL WHS has published a memo simply saying that they have changed the interpretation of the law. They're not saying that the law has changed, but they're simply saying that the interpretation that they used to give earlier has changed, and now they're interpreting it to be that if the employer is working at an end client place, then the end client also has to file the LCA and H1. Of course, they based their interpretation or change in interpretation on the regulation that is supposed to be published but not yet published. So if that never gets published, then it's unlikely that the memo from DOL will be implemented. Most probably they will rescind that memo by issuing another press release or another memo. So we have to wait and see what happens with that. So the three agencies involved there, the DHS, Department of Labor, and the Wage and Hour Division. So that's the third and I think most damaging regulation that we have to watch out for, because in all three, pretty much the purpose seems to be to eliminate lower level employees or to eliminate employees that are, have less number of years of experience, and also to pretty much eliminate the whole staffing company model by saying that clients have to file LCAs and H1s, because we know no client will file an LCA and a H1. And if they had to, then they would just do it themselves. They would put them on the payroll and file their own H1 and LCAs. So there's no role for the staffing companies to play anymore. Now, if this gets implemented, the only recourse we have is to show that the right to control is still with the staffing company and not with the end client. So that we've been doing that successfully in many of our, the right to control cases, RFEs that we've had in the past, and which went away, of course, because of the ITServe lawsuit, which they won. But now it's come back in a different way. So we'll have to again prove the same thing, that the staffing company has the right to control, not the end client, and therefore the end client doesn't have to file the LC and H1. So that's the only way to overcome, I think, that particular regulation if it does get implemented. So these are three things that we have to wait and watch and see what happens. The Biden administration, they're expected obviously to be more lenient, but they have a lot on their plate, and we don't exactly know where they stand with reference to high-skilled workers and H1s. So let's wait and see what happens. I'm hoping that if the Biden administration continues with trying to implement these regulations, then the courts are our only recourse, and I hope the courts will then overturn them.